this working? Excellent. All right, let's hear it for Howard. So now I'm going to bring up my lovely panelists for today, starting with Mark Foxton, who heads up sports marketing for Levi's, where he oversees all property and rights holder relationships and activations. He has over 25 years of experience in revenue generation, brand marketing, event production, and media partnerships. So everyone, please give a warm welcome to Mark Foxton. Any seat. You have the benefit of being the first person, so I hope that's actually the best seat. All right, no pressure. Next up is Seth Cole, who is the Senior Vice President of Brand Partnerships for Turner Ignite Sports. Within his role, Seth leads partnership development and activation across Turner Sports, and he leads an impressive portfolio of leading brands and league partnerships. Thanks, Seth. All right, so Ed, you have the worst seat now. That's what everyone's determined. It's okay. So Ed Romaine is the Senior Vice President and Chief Brand Officer for Bleacher Report. He's a proven sales and branded content lead executive with more than 15 years of experience overseeing the development and implementation of advertising solutions across multiple mediums. Welcome, Ed.
Thanks for my seat.
All right, so this one is for everyone. I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about what you do and what excites you about sports sponsorships today. Let's start with you, Ed.
I think the bio explained it. Hi, everybody. But I'll give you the brief summation. Marketing at Bleacher Report is broken out into two distinct areas. The first, a lot of what Howard alluded to in his presentation, is sales marketing. So that is comprised of the groups that are really responsible for coming up with compelling advertising solutions that we take to the marketplace. I think as we've matured as an organization, part of what we've been tasked with is diversifying the portfolio of assets that we can extend to our investors, which has been largely fruitful for us, and we're appreciative. On the brand marketing side of the house, we're really focused on broadening our audience and supporting the growth of our app product. And we do that with a sort of full funnel exercise through which we socialize unique value propositions around the product, and also just talking about why community building and being a part of the ecosystem that Bleacher Report represents is important.
I know he gave me a hard time about the question, but that was a great answer.
He's going to be more eloquent than I am. I have a 3-week-old, so if I doze off,
I'm going to pick him up.
Sleep deprivation. I lead the team at Turner Sports that's similar to the first half of what Ed talked about with the sales marketing team. We call it brand partnerships, content partnerships, integrated marketing. We have about 14 different names. But essentially, we're the team that helps enable the sales team to sell better. We specialize in all the non-traditional assets that you might see show up on any of our platforms or any of our touch points. And we liaison in between the sales team, the different leagues we represent, our content team in Atlanta, and all the other teams that support us, like legal, marketing, things like that. So that's the majority of what we do. We're always making somebody unhappy, I feel like, either telling a salesperson we can't do something they want to do, or asking a content person to do something they may not want to do. Trying to find that right balance is really what we specialize in. And I think, what was the second part? What's exciting about?
Yeah, what excites you?
I've been at Turner for Warner Media now for 16 years, and I would say we've had the same properties for the most part over that time. I've been talking about MLB baseball, PGA, and NBA for years, but every day is different. Every project is different. I think that's what keeps me going.
That was pretty eloquent. Not too bad. 3 weeks, yeah. All right. So I've been with Levi's for 5 years when we really started the sports marketing department, which was really, it came into existence because of the naming rights deal that we did at the stadium, obviously with the 49ers. So my role when I first came on board was to just help launch the stadium, and how do we make sure that we take advantage of all the rights and the assets that were part of that partnership, which I think a lot of us always sign up for a lot and not sure what we're going to do with everything, right? So in the process of doing that, we also launched our licensed sports apparel side of things. So we currently have sports licenses across the NBA, the NFL. We've also worked in baseball and a few other teams, including some of the Premiership and so forth there. But really on a day-to-day basis, what I'm responsible for is working with our brand team, our retail team, our wholesale team, and finding sports platforms, influencers, properties, media that can help drive our brand. And really, as Howard said earlier, when you look at, sports, music, lifestyle, that whole intersection there, sports becoming such a big part of that, where can we find ways to drive the Levi's brand and ultimately purchase through sports partnerships?
Thanks, Mark. You teed up my next question perfectly. I'm curious about your guys' perspective on how sports sponsorships have evolved and where you see them going next, and how, in your different roles, you're kind of a key part of making that happen.
Am I starting?
Go for it. I'll switch it up for the next question.
Okay. So I didn't answer the second part of Katie's question the first time, which what makes sports sponsorships interesting,
It's
in
okay,
my
I looked
opinion.
past it.
But
I didn't
this
as well.
question is sort of related, right? I think the exciting part about sports sponsorships today is that, in our opinion, as Howard alluded to in our presentation, we believe sports is sort of the last personal passion point to be disrupted. If you think about social media, it has accelerated the rate at which things like art, music, fashion, and now sports have been democratized, where you can follow LeBron if you're a casual sports fan, or you can follow Bleacher Report if you're a statistician. But the passion that connects both of those different groups of individuals is the same, right? Because they're both excited about either a team, a league, or a player. I think as it relates to sponsorship specifically, what we've seen is that from an advertising perspective, people aren't just interested in the Super Bowl commercial anymore. If anyone's read Andrew Essex's book, The End of Advertising, he talks about the Super Bowl commercial as being sort of the last sort of vestige of like old advertising. And I think now it's more about personalization, but also data, as cliche as that sounds to a group of researchers, because we hear more and more through people like teams and maybe non-media brand entities that they're really interested in understanding how to better invest inside Gen Z and millennial spaces. That could mean creative immersive environments, it can mean connecting to them on a deeper level, and that all transcends us just showing a highlight in a way that's specific to Bleacher, a treated highlight. It's about creating moments that matter for them and speaking to them in the voice that is theirs today and always changing.
I mean, I would echo that. I think for us, it's helping advertisers like Levi's or whoever you become more contextual to who they're talking to. So the way Mark's going to reach Howard's 14-year-old son or me is going to be probably pretty different, and probably different kind of genes too. But I think that's what we also specialize on our team, is making sure that the way we're talking to somebody via Bleacher Report or NBA Social or NBA on TNT or NBA TV, they all have very different audiences, even though they're just consuming NBA content. And I think making sure that those brands conform to the right way when they're talking to that audience is part of our job, is to make sure that that's authentic, to not use a word that's been used a lot, but truly authentic to that audience.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, at Levi's, and ultimately, if you look back on sports sponsorships back in the day, you were just looking for mass impressions in traditional assets, signage, hospitality, things like that. We're very much a non-traditional brand, I think, in the sports sponsor space. We look to connect really through authenticity and through personalization, customization, many of the things that we've just talked about here, and finding those platforms that allow us to find original content. I think the biggest transition is, how do you go out and how are you finding content that can be authentic to the brand, but also to the consumer? And in the case of sports, and especially with athletes these days, I mean, they all want to be on the court playing, or they also all want to be designers. I mean, the number of folks that reach out to us and say, hey, can I help, design another pair of jeans? It's great to hear that, but, how do we connect with them? And then how do we take that and find a platform where we can connect authentically to that 14-year-old, 24-year-old, 34-year-old?
And so, piggybacking off of that, what do you think differentiates a sports sponsorship versus a partnership with another vertical? Like, why, as Levi's, have you leaned in so much, going past that authenticity and that connection with that consumer?
So we look at really kind of three pillars when we look at everything. We start with music, sports, and then style. And so, we've always been part of music going back to the history. We're on the musicians. We're kind of the performance wear there. When we got to sports, we're the fans. We're the fans' uniform is what we identified real quickly with the stadium. And being able to use sports as a platform and knowing that there's so many thousands of sports fans out there and they're passionate about there, how can we take that passion and put it into the product as well? that we have. Being a denim, being the leader in the denim space, I should say, it kind of gives us that. Being the denim authority gives us permission to go out there and and again connect and want to be a leader in the space and want to be a leader in authenticity as well as creativity. And I don't think I answered your question completely. What was the last part of that?
I don't know, but I have another question based off of what you said,
Yep.
so I'm fine with it.
Okay.
So you talked about those 3 different pillars,
Yep.
and one of the things that we've seen a lot at Bleacher Report and Turner is how much those pillars are becoming interconnected and how there's so much more fluidity. I would love for you guys to actually talk about the drop up, because I think that that's a really great example of that meld of culture and sports and music and style. And I know Howard referenced it in his presentation, but I think you guys would bring a kind of unique perspective to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit. I know we showed you an abbreviated sort of sizzle of what the drop up is. The easiest way to think about it is that the drop up at its core, it was anchored in sort of a love for the NBA, right? An NBA style. Part of how we moved Be Our Kicks from being an idea into being an actual portfolio brand within our umbrella or our ecosystem was that our users demonstrated a tremendous traction as it related to style. When the runway sort of tunnel, or it was the tunnel, I should say, the stadium tunnel became a runway of sorts, and that players became style icons in their own right from the sneaker up. In addition to that, as we mentioned, because of social media, we understand a lot of different things about players that we didn't understand 10 years ago. We understand what they're interested in beyond the game, right? LeBron's interested in creative producing a lot of different things. We know that Kevin Love loves wine. It's all these different things that allow consumers to connect to athletes in a way that they hadn't been able to before. And so the drop up really is emblematic of this democratization. It combines art, music, a love for NBA and sneaker style culture together in a way that allows fans and athletes to celebrate at the same time. Levi's was actually there with us. I don't want to speak for you, but part of what was interesting was about how you translated what denim style means specific to sneakers, and that was what we tried to accomplish together.
Yeah, I would just add on that for us. I mean, the one thing I didn't mention is we always look for center of culture moments, and so sports really does become part of center of culture, and that's why we are targeting that. But specifically with the drop up for us, is we looked at targeting men's styles, the influencers. We've said that while the sneakers are definitely driving a lot of what you see on your channels, Be Our Kicks and so forth, we have the sneaker gene. And so how can we show up and be part of that? And it's not just your kicks, but what are you complementing with that? So it was a great way to authentically connect to that fan base that we wanted to with a media partner.
The other thing I would just add as it relates to sort of Seth's world. So Seth and I spend a lot of time thinking about how to connect digital app social to linear, right? To people that are actually watching the games on TV. And you might not think if an older gentleman is tuned into Inside the NBA that they would be paying attention to any sort of style coverage that was going on outside of sort of the preamble to the game. When we released the capsule collection that was a remix of the Houston Rockets jersey with Travis Scott, we worked with Seth's team to have sort of TV coverage of that moment, and it led to the capsule collection being sold out in 30 minutes. So we talk a lot about consumers porting over and using different behaviors. Gen Z consumers, as an example, don't really watch linear basketball in the same way that they used to. They don't watch a full game. But there is an interconnectedness that we constantly work on striking the balance for so that we can catch people as they are moving through the multimodal world and conversing with their friends throughout. I don't know.
No, exactly. I mean, I think we've worked together quite a bit since Ed came on. And to me, the other one I would use, for example, is what we did with Jordan Brand around the NBA All-Star Draft. So this was the first year that we actually had Giannis draft his team and LeBron draft his team. And, we knew that was going to be a killer 12 minutes of content, but we were able to work with Ed's team and our team to come up with a Who You Got draft game that was incredibly successful. We launched it early with Jordan. They revealed their uniform. They revealed all the shoes that are going to drop during All-Star Weekend. And I think the team came together, and I think it was authentic to what Bleacher Report voice, but it also ported onto TNT and NBA Social as well. And I think it was very successful for us.
I think that's the perfect tie into my next question, which is about how you judge success. So from the apparel side, from the linear side, from the social, digital app perspective, how are you gauging the success of these partnerships?
Am I starting again?
We're going to start with Seth.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Putting you on the hot seat.
And in a room full of researchers and data folks, this is probably not the answer they're going to want to hear. But I think, the way we look at ROIs for our own uses, as well as how our advertisers or brands we work with, are all different. The way Ed looks at his things for the brand side of his business, or Mark for the Levi side of his business, is going to be different. So I think it's very difficult for me to judge if something was successful without knowing how many pairs of jeans I sold for him. So for me, it's simple. If they come back and they want to work more with us, it really comes down to renewals, and we try to get that immediate feedback from that partner to see, how did they do it? And sometimes they'll be blunt and said that part didn't work for us, and sometimes they'll be like, this is great. I think that's how I look at it.
And so on the Levi side, is it more about selling those jeans, or is there also that kind of brand building element to it, so it's more holistic?
It's a little bit of both, but I would say that we look at all of our sports activations as active campaigns, similar that we would if we were going to go out and run a back-to-school special or, whatnot, that would be going in the marketplace like we're doing right now. But I would say for us really, within each program, whether it's a consumer-facing, influencer-facing, or working directly with media, we'll establish our own KPIs. We have to have that up front, and again, what that answer is, similar to, as you mentioned, Seth, we don't have the data that probably some of you'd like to have. But each one of those programs does have a metric that we will look back on. But ultimately, I would say that within the sports world, a lot of it is creating, buzz and energy and a halo over the brand and helping to premiumize, what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Ed?
I would say the cool part about sponsorships changing or evolving to be sort of multi-pronged is that typically some clients of ours are different and have one sort of objective. There usually isn't one objective that drives success for a campaign. Typically, all of the extensions that we would provide, be it an experience or be it an attachment to an influencer collective or analytics, is all associated with media or storytelling. We do a lot of branded content. I'm not tooting my own horn because it's not my team, but we hold, I think, 18 of the top 20 most engaged branded content posts on Instagram, which is a crazy sort of stat. But the reason for that is because we believe that content is only branded if it's bad. And part of how we measure success on that front is to make sure we're telling stories and to make sure we're generating engagements beyond just a click, right? And then as it relates to immersive environments or events, it's about the amount of people that are seeing a footprint. It's about qualitative things like the PR that we're generating around an event, the awareness that we're building at the top of the funnel for things like Bleacher Report and all of the marketers that are partnering with us on the execution. So I would say it's not one size fits all. The danger in having multiple objectives is sort of making sure that our marketers are satisfied, right? Because it's helpful to understand priorities, and it's also important for us to be overt about you won't be able to accomplish necessarily a list of 10. And so helping our clients find that focus has been a priority for us.
And let's shift gears a little bit to focus on social media, the levers that you can pull to make sure that you're reaching these different objectives. So how are you leveraging social media, and are you leaning towards specific platforms? Does it depend on the different objectives of the client? Curious about how social media factors into different strategies for all of you. Let's start with Mark, because he seems the most ready to answer
I don't know
this
if I'm the
question.
most ready or not, but I don't even know what I'm going to say.
You gave
but
me the cue. I
gave
went
you
with
the
it.
cue, okay. I did the arm up, okay. For us, I think there's, we use social in a few different manners. If we're going to be looking at it from a media partnership, it's all about custom content and how can we take that content and not just use it through a traditional platform, but creating storytelling. So we need to be able to storytell out to our consumers, primarily using influencers there. And I'll just kind of speak on the influencer track in the sports world. When we use influencers, we'll then also use influencers to go through their channels. And, again, they have to be authentic Levi's fans. I mean, one of the first things we always ask an influencer, and I know the session after this is talking about it, but what is your Levi's story? I like to always say, and if influencer will tell us, some of them will immediately answer and tell you about the history of Levi's in their life. Others look at you, kind of stare at you blankly, and we'll maybe have to reconsider, if we're going to be working with them. But we want it to be authentic. And so we want them to be able to speak to the brand authentically through their voice when we bring them on as a partner through social. It's really key for us. We're not really going out and just purchasing social spots and then in our partnerships that we're doing with teams and properties, it's primarily coming up with contesting in ways that we can get fans to really be more involved. I mean, I think that's the one area where we do integrate a lot of the consumer participation, whether it's through traditional ticketing, but finding ways to do it a little bit different.
I think that ties in nicely to what we're doing over at Bleacher Report from an influencer perspective and creating real engagements with the distribution of sponsored and branded. So do you want to touch on that a little bit, Ed?
Yeah, so we do use influencer marketing as a value extension and also as a way for our partners to amplify some of the stories that they are telling in the ecosystem. If you think about it, if you have a very curated collective of folks that have their own sort of independent audiences, it provides a nice sort of amplification effect to be able to tap into those other people. The drop up, which we talked about, I feel like now ad nauseum, was strictly promoted through influencers on social media, and it drove 2,000 people in a very abbreviated time period. Using the Voice organization, which is our editorial group, as an example, one of the ways that we were able to accelerate our scale of audience was because of our always-on sort of philosophy, which was being predictive, being real-time, and being inclusive around the pieces of content that we were manifesting on social. That now is coupled with sort of a longer-form macro strategy, which is around premium storytelling or longer-form storytelling, what we call on-demand. Those pieces, though, are both connected on social because we're going to use our distribution ecosystem to talk about both and scale both. I think, as I mentioned, with sponsored and with branded, it's been really important for us to, no matter what it is, if an advertiser is involved or not, make sure that it reads authentically to the consumer. Does that always work? No. It's a very, very sensitive calculus that we're always sort of trying to work around so that it feels true. And as I mentioned, many objectives. People have different sort of priorities, but we've done a pretty good job at it, which I think is a testament to the amount of people that come and read our stuff every day.
And that's actually what I wanted to close out with. Seth, you mentioned this as well in terms of making a lot of different stakeholders happy and trying to pull together the different perspectives for an impactful experience for a brand. So what do you think are the best ways that you've kind of figured out in terms of navigating that for a different brand, for being a person who's distributing linear, partnering with social? So how do you kind of make everyone happy?
I don't think I've ever made everybody happy. I think to me, what I've found is to make sure the game of telephone is as small as it can be. We have to try to get our partners, and if they're truly partners, as close to the person that's executing the content as we can. And a lot of times we will get them in the room, probably sometimes sooner and more so than we should. I'll find some of our partners talking to the producer that's in the chair during the game I've caught before, which is probably not the right time. But to me, I'll go back to a shoe company, but Nike this past February, we did the first ever shoe drop via Google Assistant. So they had the Nike Adapt BBs, which Kyle Kuzma and Jason Tatum wore in our Lakers-Celtics game on TNT. And we were able to build a cadence throughout the night of a showcase in the pregame where we show the guys, not lacing up their shoes, but hitting the button that power laces their shoes, to close-ups during the game, to a sideline report about the shoe, and then officially dropping them, during halftime with, "Hey Google, ask Nike, what's Kuzma wearing?" We wouldn't have been able to do that with just me talking to a partner. We were able to get all of our team on board, Ed's team, our social team in Atlanta, and our production team hand in hand. Nike won't share all the stats with us, but we were sold out of the shoe in 6 minutes from halftime, and 20x the amount of voice actions that they expected within that first 15 minutes. But it took a village to do a one-night little stunt, but it was a neat opportunity. But I think kind of making sure that you have collaboration across the board, not just a walled garden.
I think that's a great way to close it out and shift it over to questions.
questions? Oh, good. Here we go.
Knew I could count on you, Josh.
I think one of the challenges that we often hear from brands is how they can effectively break through in the sports ecosystem. Obviously, it's an incredibly cluttered environment, a lot of noise, a lot of sea of sameness. You know, the leagues have 20, 25 plus partners. Teams have 125 partners, not including all the brands that are trying to ambush. So, you know, what principles would you guys advise brands to employ to break through, besides, of course, advertising on Bleacher Report?
That's a great question. Thank you. Advertise on Bleacher Report? No. I would say the peer-to-peer economy that Howard referenced is really important. So one of the ways our voices has resonated, I think, as far as being sought out versus served up, has been because we talk as if you're talking to a friend, another sports fan, somebody that's at the game with you. I think we're very quick. So part of our editorial strategy has been to deliver alerts quantifiably faster than the next sports provider. So you'll actually hear about a trade or you'll hear about a moment before someone else will tell you about it, to the tune of about 20 seconds. Part of how we're able to do that is during a game, we have like a squad, what we call an army, who has pre-predicted all of the different interactions that could take place in every quarter. And so the moment that something happens, it immediately goes out globally, and that allows us to be faster. I think those are two of the principles that we think about when we think about, you know, being a standout brand inside the space. But like you said, more and more, there are people that continue to repurpose content and they're repurposing it. One of the other ways I should just reference quickly is that when we see a highlight, as an example, what you'll see at Bleacher Report is usually what we call a treated highlight, where some sort of animated effect will be placed on top of a moment in a game. And so what will typically be a 1 minute moment on linear or whatever can be extended for over the course of weeks so that the narrative continues because people are sharing it and talking about it, and it becomes like an extension of the story beyond just the moment on the court.
No, exactly. I think that was great. You know, I think the other thing I would say is to kind of tie back to earlier is basically being sensitive to how you talk to the audience you're hitting, right? So what we saw early on with esports when we launched E-League was you can't just be brand X and come in and run the same ad or the same message, because these fans are very savvy and they see through it very quickly. But if you talk with them, you know, we had partners early on like Arby's and Buffalo Wild Wings who literally probably put more creative efforts into that than they have in some of their other creative, and it resonated quickly. You know, they saw, you know, brand lift in some of the studies we did. Jay would probably be able to share more details, but you know, I think that's the right way to do it, especially when you're making these incredible investments. I mean, none of this stuff is cheap. So to come in and be able to not have that same effort into your creative, I think is a mistake.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Sorry, I didn't want to hug the attention, but I just had a question for Mark. So based on your experience, how do you evaluate the brand equity value of sports partnerships like this? Do you think like 1 year, 3 years out, do you focus on any particular part of the funnel, awareness, consideration, or even all the way down to purchase?
All of the above. No, I mean, it's interesting. So Levi's doesn't always do a lot of multi-year partnerships. And from my experience from being on the other side of the table most of the time, you need to see something through more than just one time to really be able to measure the success. So I think for us, it's identifying the right, you know, platforms or programs that in which we can still maybe not always be, call it a 5-year or 10-year partner of a team or with you know, a media partner necessarily, but it's how do we reinforce that message through different properties but still have a consistent message, if that makes sense. And so it's, you know, how we're connecting and really where we're seeing engagement, you know, ultimately, you know, and we kind of measure everything at near. We look at things at near and far. So if we're doing an activation on the ground, you know, how are we engaging? What are the results there at the event itself? What are we seeing in local media and pickup? And ultimately, is this a program that could be taken and one that can be amplified either through a region or ultimately globally for us.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.